Hello folks and welcome to Linux for Seniors. In today's video I'm going to be talking about possibly some backup drives and also in the future I'll be talking about a tool that you can get for free, that it's open source, that you can actually clone hard drives. I've done it with if you're wondering how you can even take a Windows drive and make it bigger, that kind of tool. So I'll talk about that in a future video. Today I'm going to talk about simple ways to format hard drives, USB sticks, and how you can possibly use those for backup purposes. Everybody should always back up their personal files one way or another. So I will walk through this video fairly slowly and show you some tools. I can use a tool that's available in many Linux distributions, but I'm also going to show another tool briefly how you can do that. And most of this stuff that I'm going to talk about is actually found on a lot of your live mediums when you're installing these Linux distributions. And the other tool is for the Debian and Ubuntu type of distributions. So I'll get into that in a second. So I'll say welcome to Linux for Seniors. Now, since none of my videos are under 2 minutes, I highly suggest you subscribe. Here's an example of what is on my YouTube channel. I'll just bring it open. So I started this YouTube channel on the 9th of February. My previous channel had about 450 videos, and more importantly, this is Linux for Seniors, and it's not really all for seniors. Linux is for any age, and I even put that in my description down there. But more importantly, it's targeted toward an audience that just want a relaxed environment and have things, explained a little simply. I do encourage, I just put that in there, I do encourage that you watch all of my videos on a large screen if you can, since most of your mobile devices or mobile screens are very well limited in viewing, in other words small. But if that's all you have, that's all you have. Just be aware that a lot of my videos will look better on a larger screen. Okay, with that said, there's my growing library. I have material on all kinds of things. As my channel grows, you can use this little search feature here. If you're using a standard web browser, I'll say that again, a standard web browser, not a mobile device, because you don't have this little magnifying glass next to the About on your mobile applications of YouTube. You'll only have this one. That searches all of YouTube. This searches my internal YouTube site. And I'll give you an example, like mouse, for instance, like computer mouse. These are all the videos that have to do the word mouse. So my videos are all tagged with keywords on them. So if your keyword matches a video, it'll pull it up. So here's one for MX Linux, Gen 2 for instance, Pop OS, Linux Mint, and all the way down the list. Okay. So I have some links for you also. If you're interested in other distributions, you can click that. And then if you're interested in like mouse pointers, you can watch my videos on how to install mouse pointers or mouse themes. This is a non-profit website. And then there are some other fun stuff, maybe to some folks, to read about Linux and Arch Linux, that kind of thing. Okay, so now we're going to move on. So I talked about a couple of tools. Now, this distribution happens to be a Debian and Ubuntu based distribution. So I'm going to first make mention of Gparted, but I'm going to show another tool first of if you are using those other distributions. But Gparted is actually found on most of your startup disks, believe it or not. And you can format stuff in here. And I'll touch upon that a little bit later, but these are all the devices that I can actually format. Now, don't let these letters confuse you. Okay, the first thing you need to understand whenever you are formatting anything in Linux, I would suggest giving it a name. I'm going to show you some examples of what I'm doing here. My file manager is sitting here. And it's no big deal. I'm not going to hide what kind of distribution that I'm using. So let me just give you Neofetch information real quick and get this out of the way. So anyways, this is Linux Mint 21. All right. But anyways, you can see my internal, or excuse me, any device. So what is a device in Linux? Or at least in this file manager, Nemo. Well, a device is either an internal hard drive or an external hard drive or USB stick. I have all of them in here. As a matter of fact, one of my USB drives is actually partitioned with two partitions. This one here, denoted by that symbol that says USB on it. So my backup USB drive is labeled backup USB drive, and I encourage that you do that. Now the backup USB, it can be done several ways. There's a really simple tool in a lot of distributions you may not be aware of. Now these here are my internal hard drives that are currently in use, and that's an NVMe drive. Kind of looks like a solid state chip. I have another video that has to do with hard drives and NVMEs that shows pictures. These are regular solid state drives. But in either case, I'm going to show you the tool that you can look at the partitions on here and create partitions. And then I'll show you the simple tool that you can format even USB sticks and portable hard drives in this distribution, just to make it simple. Okay? So let me first talk about the simple tool to format any USB device. In this distribution and others, usually just type in USB and you'll come up with something like formatter, for instance. The image writer is used to write Linux images, and that's a simple tool also to use. If you download an image for another Linux distribution, you can burn those onto, I'll just talk about it briefly. You can click in here if you downloaded the image, click the appropriate USB stick, as in my case I first have to select an image for me to actually display that, and then just hit write. It's that simple. Now I'll talk about the USB stick formatter. Most people are interested in that. And the stick formatter is an extremely easy to use tool. Look at all the choices that I have currently. Well, actually two. I actually have a hard drive that I can format because it's connected to a USB cable. So it's considered a USB stick. Thumb drive is another name for, as some people call these. Now, what are you going to use for a file system? What is a file system? All right, so we all know that we need to possibly, maybe not, but I'll walk through this in a very simple explanation. Maybe you understand these words, that the file manager or the device, sorry about that. So the device that you're formatting needs to be read on possibly your own computer or another computer. Maybe you're transporting, let's say, your simple Word documents from one computer to another, and they're different. One is Microsoft, the other one's Linux. Or maybe the other one is a Mac and the other one Linux. Does that make sense? So you take that Word document, or maybe you're transporting a photograph, a JPEG, a PNG. Those are photographic type of images. You would probably want to choose FAT32. Why is that? Because if you read the first line of the yellow box, FAT32, File Allocation Table, that's what that stands for, is compatible everywhere. The next one in line is exFAT, almost compatible. Now, the notes on there, it says cannot handle files larger than 4 gigabytes. That means single files. It doesn't mean you can't put, let's say you've got a big enough thumb drive, or that big old 320 gigabyte drive that's considered like a USB stick. Then you can put on 300 gigabytes worth of documents or photos. That's what it just means, a single file. Now exFAT, on the other hand, can handle files larger, single files larger, but as you noticed, it's not as compatible as FAT32 or File Allocation Table. NTFS or NT File Systems is made for Windows. That would be, you can use that also to format that if you are sharing files between Microsoft Windows and Linux. NTFS is proprietary. And again, it's Microsoft Windows proprietary. But extension 4 is on the bottom. Extension 4 is only made for Linux. It is not compatible with Microsoft Windows or Apple Macs. Just wanted to point that out. If you want to format your USB stick with FAT32, that's your best option if you want to be compatible with Microsoft Windows, Apple Macs, and Linux. All right, with that said, I'm going to pick a device. I can pick either one of these things. Now, when you're doing this, I want you to be aware that if you have an existing data on these things, it will wipe it out. So forewarn you. All right, either one of these things. It doesn't matter. All right, a lot of these USB sticks will also have an identification on it. Like that's manufacturer name, PNY. And they'll also have silly codes on them, like USB, Universal Serial Bus 3.0. That just means it's a USB 3. That's just a label that the manufacturer put on here. And now you can see those silly letters, dev/SDE. That's how Linux identifies these things. Your system may be different. It all depends on how many hard drives you have in there, is how this will handle what name that gave it. Don't focus in on that. You'll get lost in the weeds unless you understand that. And down the road, you can actually do your own homework. But more importantly, it is just a label that Linux gave it. So the label itself, when you are formatting these USB sticks or external hard drives, my suggestion to you is not use the word stick. Use the word what it's intended for. So is this your backup drive? Is this made for backups? You can use, let's say it's a backup game drive. So you can put BAC game maybe. This is all up to you, how you label things. You can use a simple label like X if you like, but give it a discerning name. All right, with that said, the USB stick formatter is a simple tool to use. You click on the device that's currently plugged into a USB port, and in my case I have two. You pick the file system. Is it FAT30? Is it going to be compatible with those three operating system or not? If not, click the down arrow and change that. It's that simple. So what happens if I format that with extension 4? It is only compatible with Linux type of systems. What happens when you take that USB stick and insert it into a Microsoft machine or a Apple Mac? Nothing. It will treat it as it doesn't see it. It's like blank. So be careful about doing that. And a lot of the other systems will, if you format that, you lost obviously all your data on that system also. But if you want to stick with some compatibility, this is the default. Okay. So on this distribution, when I bring this up, this automatically populates. Okay. So what's another tool in this distribution and others? All right. So this is a very popular tool. Linux Mint happens to just dump it in your hardware section. And you can also go look for that in your Mint menu. My Mint menu is Linux for Seniors in this case. But more importantly, I can go look for that. So DI for disks. It's the second item here. So let me open that tool up. And it may look complex to some, but I'm going to walk you through this very slowly. It's a wonderful tool, whether you just look at drives or whether you actually want to perform work. So the hamburger menu sits up here. And this is called the GNOME Disk Utility. This can be found in a lot of Linux distributions. GNOME Disk Utility. So if you're not using this distribution, for instance, then you may want to go ahead and take a look at your software managers for this tool. Maybe download it. That kind of thing. Starting at the top, not to make it too complex, or should I start at the bottom? So this is the current booted up drive that I'm currently running right now on this distribution. And how do I read this stuff? What does all this junk mean? Well, first of all, it's going to identify the product up here by model number. This happens to be a solid state hard drive, and it happens to be an NVMe. It looks like a long USB stick, and you can see a picture of it if you see my other video for hard drives and NVMe's. They're normally mounted on the bottom of the motherboard. These are more modern. They're very fast. It's denoted by device name NVMe. It is partitioned with extension 4. That's a Linux partition. The front-end partition is formatted with FAT, File Allocation Table. This is used in a lot of cases for booting in other hard drives, for instance, using Grand Unified Bootloader or GRUB. You may have heard that buzzword. For dual booting or multi-booting. That's what I'm using, multi-boots. So extension 4. I'll get into creating partitions and stuff in a second. The next one in line is a backup drive, and it is an NVMe dedicated backup internal hard drive that I use. It is formatted with Linux, extension 4. This is a 1 terabyte NVMe disk dedicated for backups. Do you want me to give you the... now, if I open up this one here, you can do this with this particular GNOME thing, but not with Gparted. If you use Gparted while viewing this and that open, these will disappear. But this drive here is this drive there. Oh, so that's confusing to some folks. This is the actual hard drive. This is on other internal hard drives and external. So this is the drive I'm booted in from, and that represents this, if that's not confusing enough. So the next one in line is this NVMe, and that is this one right here that says backup on it. And I have files in there. They're all done by documents. And just to not to get too deep into the weeds, I have what they call a special script running in the background that is ran on boot up, that if any of these folders change, it actually syncs them with this drive. Not going to talk about that in this video. But this is what I use my drive for on this machine, is to back up these things automatically. And I can put other files on it. So as I move down, so this one here is the another 1 terabyte drive. It's this one here. It's denoted by the 991, close enough to 1 terabyte though. And that's formatted also with FAT. Extension 4. It also has a swap partition because this drive can be booted all by itself. So when I created that particular, I don't remember what Linux system I have on that, to be honest with you, right off the top of my head, because I keep swapping out Linux systems for testing purposes. But this is an internal 1 terabyte drive that I used to set up all by itself, and it created the extension 4 partition. It created a swap partition that is used like a buffer when you run out of memory. That's what swap means. It just swaps information to that little partition to use in case you don't have enough RAM, for instance. And then I just have 2.1 megabytes of free space. This is considered junk. 2.1 megabytes is nothing. You have your USB sticks in gigabytes. Remember that. So here's a 480 gigabyte hard drive, denoted even by the name of it. It's a PNY CS900. I actually have about, I want to say about 6 of these things on different computers. I got, now why did I use those? I just got a great deal on them. That's why. All right, so we have free space here. In other words, junk, 2.6 megabytes. Again, nothing. Extension 4, so that's obviously another Linux partition. This one has a FAT partition, file allocation table is what that stands for. And I got free space on this side and this side. So if I wanted to add these two, I'm losing about a whopping, 5 megabytes? Yeah, well, it's nothing compared to these gigabyte disks. If you were to understand what the difference between a megabyte and a gigabyte, there's a huge difference. All right, so moving along. So I have a spinning hard drive inside my machine, denoted by backup 1 and 2 here. That's the labels I gave them. I'll get into that in a minute. This has 2 partitions. Now, these are partitioned with extension 4 and BTRFS. BTRFS is also another Linux type of partition. Some people on the internet have Linux servers formatted with BTRFS, for instance. Now, for you, I would probably stick with something simple like extension 4, something you can be familiar with and, well, maybe easier to understand. But you can also have Linux operating systems that are completely formatted with BTRFS. You may have seen that option on some of your Linux distributions. Okay, this has been around for a while, and this has been around a little bit less. Now I'm going to get into these drives that I have currently sitting as USB sticks. Now you're going to be going, oh, wait a minute. What do you mean USB stick? It says 320 gigabyte hard drive. Yes, but it is considered a USB stick, actually. I can format it. Let me bring up that tool again. USB stick formatter, right? 320 gigabyte hard drive. That's what this is. All right, so with that said, let me close that tool and point to this one. That's this one right here. I currently have no files in there, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use this as a guinea pig. So the other side of this thing has another partition with extension 4, FAT32 extension 4. Which one do you think I would use if I take this portable hard drive via USB cable over to a Microsoft Windows machine? Try to put files on it. Do you think I could put files on this partition? This one right here? No, because it's for Linux. Microsoft Windows doesn't see this at all, but it will see this one. It will see that as a 160 gigabyte drive, formatted with file allocation 32, FAT32. Now the one's called W95, but it's FAT32. Forget about all these buzzwords. Some extra free space, some extra free space. This one's got a little bit more than the previous ones. It's just the way it broke up the drive. This is a USB stick, completely formatted with FAT32. I used the USB stick formatter tool to do this with. I am going to use the tool in here for also creating a partition in here. So that is this one right here. Now my suggestion, if you use this tool, this GNOME Disk Utility, or in Linux Mint's term, disks, make sure that you got the files off of there before you format these things, if they're important to you. All right. So what I'm going to do in this case, first of all, point to these little boxes. These are called mounted drives. If I push this button, it will unmount that drive and also disappear out of here. The internal drives will not. The internal drives will stay. My USB drive, though, on the other hand, will go away if I push one of these buttons, because they're a single. Or should I say, will it go away? I'm going to empty the trash on that one. All I did was change the label. That's still the USB stick, but it disappeared out of this menu, right? So I'm going to click that again. I had some extra trash in there. What if I pulled the actual stick out? Well, I'm going to do that. That's a spinning hard drive. If you're curious, it made a funny noise. So that is the current USB stick, and it says no media because it's not mounted. So let me do all that one more time. I'm going to first reinsert the USB stick. Okay. And let me unmount the other one so it doesn't confuse you. All right, so that's the USB stick, and I'm going to leave it there, and here it is. And then I am going to reinsert the other USB hard drive and let it actually be recognized. Okay, it auto opens, no big deal. That's these two. Actually, it's a single hard drive, isn't it? It's that one. It has two partitions. It's identified as such in here with the USB symbol on it because it's a USB connected hard drive. All right. With that said, I have some extra keys up here. So that since this is a USB device, I have a power key. I can power off the disk. If I have an internal hard drive, I don't have that option. All right, let's talk about partitions. I'm going to use this drive as my guinea pig. The first thing I need to understand as a user is, do I have files on these? I do not. So I don't need to worry about copying anything off this drive and putting it elsewhere, whether it be in my internal drive or another backup drive like USB, for instance. Yes, you can do that. You can transfer files from here to here. It's easy to do with this file manager, actually. You can actually open up two windows. Two windows. Now, let's get rid of all of these partitions. So I'm going to start over here. I'm not going to make it hard for you, but I'm going to delete these things by hitting the minus key. Are you sure? Yes. So that partition is now free space. I'm going to click this one and delete that partition. Now that is considered a free drive. In other words, all of a sudden things went away. There are no partitions on this thing. So of course the file manager doesn't understand anything. It's currently deleting the partition. Okay. So let's open up that tool one more time. And let's deal with this 320 drive and close all these boxes so they're not that confusing to you. Is this wallpaper distracting? I can pick something different if you like. And wrong. I don't want it to display. Darth Vader maybe? No, I'm just kidding, folks. Stormtroopers. Let me pick something neutral in here. Maybe something on the dark side, as one would say. How about this nice looking waterfall? All right, let's deal with this thing here. Is this window too small for you? Again, I suggest you watch all of my videos on a larger device. But more importantly, I cannot increase the text on here. Well, I can, but I'm hoping that you can see this. So it says free space, 320 gigabyte of free space. Unallocated space. What that means, it's kind of like a raw hard drive. Okay? I can do the same thing with USB sticks. I'll show that in a minute. I'm going to hit plus. Now, here is the cool feature. I have 320 gigabytes to play with. Do I want to use the whole drive or just use part of it? On the first example, I'm going to actually use the whole drive. On the second example, because I'm going to redo this, I'm going to split this in half. Does that make sense? So partition size is 320 gigabytes. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to give it a label. Always give these things a label. Backup. How about USB? Is that a good enough label? You can put anything you want. Label your drives. I normally suggest you make your names simple. And I also suggest, just as my suggestion is, make it all one word. Don't put a space bar in there. Now my next choice is, are you going to be using this for Linux only? Then maybe you want to choose extension 4. There's another option, which I'll discuss a little bit later, called LUCKS. It's used for encryption. But I'm not going to get into that just yet. But if you're interested, keep watching. Toward the end of this video, I'll talk about LUCKS. So I can do extension 4. Extension 4 is for Linux. It even tells you that in here. I can also use NTFS or NT file system for like Microsoft Windows. So if you format that with NTFS, you can view it on Linux and also Microsoft Windows. Now, I have a Mac laptop, and I have been able to view an NTFS partitions, but not all Apple Macs will be able to see NTFS partitions. For use with all system and devices, File Allocation Table, or FAT. I know it's kind of funny if you can think about it, the FAT guy. The FAT guy is compatible with everybody. He's nice and happy with everyone. FAT32 is what it's going to use if I use that. File Allocation Table. What if I choose something different? Then you want to use Other. And then hit Next. And then you can choose different type of partitions like BTRFS. Translation Copy on Write Linux System. BTRFS or exFAT. Let me back this up and use the simple compatible with everybody. Using the label backup USB. If you wanted to currently erase the drive, you could do that. But it definitely takes longer, so I'm not going to do that in this video. Just be aware that there's an option there. Now I'm going to hit Create. So now it creates a partition. And it's still doing that. So that's a spinning hard drive, so it's cycling right now. And when it's finished, it'll let me know. And now it's finished. So the partition type is FAT32. Forget about that W part. Just focus in on the FAT32. That even says 320 GB for gigabyte FAT, File Allocation Table. So let's see what it looks like in my file manager now. Well, it looks like that. It's a single partition. I just mounted it and I can start depositing files for my internal hard drive into here as my backup drive. I could, in this file manager, open up another window and drag files into it or folders. So that's how you create a single partition. There's a little bit of waste of space on both sides. No big deal though. The big difference you need to understand is gigabytes are a lot larger than megabytes. That's 34 megabytes. It's considered negligible or hardly anything to worry about. Now I'm going to delete this partition again. Boy, I'm really abusing that. Or should I go to the next one? Let's take a USB stick. This is a 16 gigabyte USB stick formatted with FAT32. Same partition. I'm going to also delete that one on purpose. So this is done the exact same way as the hard drive. I'm going to click that. I'm going to use all of the 16 gigabytes, or should I split it in half? I can, and I will split it in half. So since this is roughly 16, 8.2, and then 7.7, you can dial this in if you like to get it really close, but you're never going to get an exact match. So I'm going to make the first partition larger than the next. Does that make sense? So what I'm doing here, and you can do this with any hard drive too, an internal hard drive even, is next. So the first partition it's going to create, right? Because I partition it two ways, and I'll have some extra space when it's done. So I'm going to call that one USB back 2, for instance, or 1, or whatever. So I'm trying to get a different name than what I already have, because I got, actually I don't have anything that starts with USB back, so I can use those names. The reason I'm doing this so I don't want to confuse you with my other devices. That's the only reason I'm doing that. So I'm going to call that one USB back 1. And we're going to format that with FAT32. And then I'll show a different file format. All right, so now I got some free space. Okay. And USB sticks are, they usually, if they're USB 3s and it's denoting that right there, it says PNY USB 3, they're fairly quick. So I got free space. Well, do I want to format that now or later? Because you don't have to format this. You can just leave it and do it later. And then you can use this here to transport files between all of those 3 operating systems, the Linux, the Mac, and the Microsoft. But let's take care of this partition now. So I'm going to click it. Anytime you're doing partitions, you need to click on it. This will be remove, right? Delete, in other words. It even tells me so. So I'm going to hit plus. So I got the remaining partition. It gives me the option of splitting this again in half. That would be kind of ridiculous, but I could split that 7 gigabytes even in half if I wanted to, or thirds or whatever. But I'm going to, of course, leave the whole space. All right, what do we want to pick? How about extension 4 this time? Or should I pick the other? I'll do extension 4. Create. Now, I forgot to label this thing. It just says file system. Oh, what does it look like in my file manager? Let's go look. All right, so I have one that says backup 1. And the other one just says 7.7 gigabyte volume. Now, this is where people can get confused, that SDD2 and SDD1. This one has a proper label, though. So I know that's some sort of a backup drive, but I don't know what this is, unless I just did this. So what's a good option when you're doing these partitions? Again, put labels on them. So I'm going to do this again with only this partition and leave this one alone. Minus, delete. I still have this partition here. I still now have free space to do this again. I'm going to use the whole space, and this time I'm not going to forget to put a label. So we called this one USB back 1, so we're going to call this USB back 2, just for a label. And this time I'm going to use extension 4 and do the same thing. All right, it's creating the partition. It's got a little clocking wheel here. Now you can see the name of it, USB back 2, USB back 1. Underneath here it says partition 1, partition 2, 8.2 gigabyte file allocation table, or FAT. Again, it's FAT32, file allocation 32. And this one says 7.7 gigabyte extension 4, ext4, a Linux partition. What's it look like in my file manager? Well, this is an internal, right? Symbol, internal backup. And these are my USB symbols on this particular file manager. So that's USB back 1, already mounted. What's the difference? You need to mount these things before you deposit files on them. And that's the symbol for that. So basically, I just mounted both of these. They're right here. So if I deposit files on there, I drag in my documents or my photos, or maybe even a portable document format or PDF. If I drag this USB stick, I eject it, take it over to a Microsoft machine. Am I going to be able to read this partition? No, it won't even see it, but it will see this one. I stick this on my Mac machine, it will see this partition, not this one. Keep that in mind when you format and set up partitions, even if you use that simple USB tool. Again, I'm going to make mention of this tool. Formatter. So now I'm going to go back to the drive here and give you another example. And I'm going to split this big 320 hard drive. When I'm doing this, you can also do this to internal hard drives. Just be aware that if you plug in a hard drive on the inside of your console computer, for instance, does it still have files on it before you erase these things? I keep saying that. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that on purpose. So now the whole drive is empty again. And I'm going to hit plus. And I'm going to split this in half. Okay, so again, dial in what you want. 169. I'm trying to get it close enough to, oh, look at that. That's a rarity that you can get a perfect split. But anyways, that's a perfect split. So again, what am I going to use? Well, I can use backup 3. I don't have backup 3 in my menu, so I'm going to use that as a label. I'll make that I'll make that FAT32 for the first one. So now I have some free space. So I'm going to do something different on this one here. So I'm going to use the rest of the 160 gigabytes leftovers and hit next. And I can also use other and next and BTRFS and hit format. All right, so now I have a problem because I didn't label this again. I did it again. See, that's 160. Oh, rats. I'll delete that one more time. Yeah, that's why that's important. All right, start with the label. What are we going to call this one? Backup 4. How's that? All right. Other. Next. BTRFS, a Linux file system. It's got some extra space left over. Don't worry about it. Both sides of the drive. Don't worry about it. So that's a BTRFS partition, 160 gigabytes, called backup 4. That's on partition 2. And then backup 3 on partition 1, 160 gigabyte. So that's how you can do partitions. Now I'm going to switch this up a little bit. I'm going to use this with extension 4 with encryption. That's for you folks out there that want to learn that part of it. Okay, so I'm trying not to get too deep into the weeds, but for the folks that want to know how to do this. Backup 4, or what do we use? 3, so that's 4. I'm just picking numbers out of the hat. I'm just trying to make the labels where you can see them in your file managers and not have to deal with that SDD1 or SDD2 in this one. Okay, so you can have something like fuzzy friendly names. So I'm going to use extension 4, but use LUCKS Encryption, Linux Unified Key Setup. You can look at that word up yourself. Okay, so I'm going to hit next. It's going to ask me for a password. If the passwords do not match, you cannot hit create. I'm not going to show that password though. But you could if you're typing it in yourself. The data stored on this partition or volume will only be accessible with a correct password. Don't forget it. That's the key word. Create. A lot of times reformatting anything with an encrypted drive also sometimes can be stubborn as far as getting it to deformat, in other words, when you get done playing with it. I want you to notice that that symbol is unlocked currently. But I forgot to do this again. I left the label alone. Oh. But I got 2 of these now. How do I fix this? Well, I'm going to have to wait until it's finished. This is still working. Now it's done. And technically now this is just called what in my menu here? Well, it's unlocked, but more importantly, what is this thing? So we have backup 3 sitting in here, and that previous one was backup 4. So it's got the file manager a little confused. So I'm going to eject both of them. Okay, so this is only seeing this side of it. However, your file manager just interpreted it that over here as an encrypted partition. And it's going to ask me for a password. Ah, oh, rats. Did I remember that password? No. I'm not even going to deal with it. I'm going to delete this partition. Now we're back to free space. And sometimes this is very stubborn. plus, full thing. Label is important, right? Backup 4. Internal drive, LUCKS Encryption, password time. So I'm going to confirm the password, but misspell it. It's green. I add an extra character, it goes gray. Got a little triangle box. Passwords do not match. I think most people get the idea. Now it's going to create that same thing, and it's going to do a split in here. It's going to put the partition, the encrypted LUCKS on the top, and then the other part of it on the bottom. So that's how that's denoted in here. So this is protected with LUCKS encryption. Once this gets done with its clocking and whatever else, eventually this will mount. So it takes a little bit of time for your partitions with encryption. Just be patient. Okay, I'm still waiting for it to actually mount in my file manager. I may be able to force it if I do this. No, still waiting. Okay. Okay, backup 4. So that it's holding the data from the previous. So I'm going to eject them on purpose. But I've already completed this process. So what I'm going to do is turn off the drive and turn it back on. In other words, remount it. And it should complain about that password. It just populated right there. So now it's asking me for a password. On this system here, I can have it remember my password until I log out of the system, or put in my password, it'll open it up and then forget it about the password immediately. So if I eject it, I'd have to enter that again or remember that forever on this system. Just use this sparingly. So right now it says encrypted partition. You have no idea what's on there. The other one's open. I'm sorry, it's this one here. Wrong drive. This one here, backup 3 is that one right there. This one here is still waiting for me. It says there's an operation already pending. It's waiting for me to give it a password. There's a dialog box underneath here. Where's that dialog box? It's right there. Sorry. So we need to address this, in other words. My file manager needs that information right now. So let's give it to it. I'm going to have it remember my password until logout. So I'm going to hit that. And now it's going to mount the drive. It's going to change that encrypted to a number. In this case, it's called backup 4. So backup 4 is this one. It's ready for files. Okay. Also, what you'll notice in your file manager is it'll say unlocked. When you first create these, it'll automatically unlock. If you eject them, they'll have a lock symbol until you enter that password. Okay. So that is one hard drive with 2 partitions, and then in this case it had encryption. Can I make multiple partitions on USB sticks? Sure. Why would you want to? Well, for whatever purpose you can think of. Most people don't do that to USB sticks. Can I still format this USB stick using a simple tool? You sure can. Example of that, because this happens rather quickly here, is you can format that same stick, this 16 gigabyte stick, by selecting it and formatting that with that FAT32, and these will disappear because I currently didn't put any files on it. A label is always default USB stick. Label these things properly. Call it what you want to intend to use it for. Format. I'm going to put in my password. You noticed all the information disappeared over here and immediately turned into USB backup because I used this tool here, USB stick formatter. Can I do that with this drive? I can. This one here is going to give me a little trouble, so I'm not going to attempt to do that right now. So I'm getting kind of long, and I'm not sure if I can squeeze all that information in today. Maybe I'll make this into 2 different videos. And this is Gparted. And you normally have to log in here when you're doing this. So I have all my hard drives and USB sticks sitting right here. This is a little bit harder for some people to understand. That's where it uses all that STDD stuff. This again is Gparted. The other thing about some distribution, when you have Gparted open, their file managers won't display anything unless the device is mounted. So I'm going to unmount these backup drives. And I want you to see that there is nothing in here in my devices while this is open. I'm going to close this. And these all populated. This confuses people. Gparted is also used to make partitions. It is also found on a lot of distributions that have live Linux media on it. You'll actually find that tool there. You know, I'm getting into the 43rd minute, so I think I'm going to make this in 2 parts. I'll discuss Gparted in my next video. All right, folks, on that note, hopefully you have subscribed. That way you can watch this first part of this video, and then stay tuned for Gparted, the second part. Thank you for watching.